Legislative elections on January the 12th put the pan-blue camp firmly in control of the legislature. The Kuomintang achieves an overwhelming victory, taking 81 of the 113 legislative seats, a larger than expected win. The DPP, which had been the largest single party in the legislature, wins just 27. President Chen Shui-bian steps down after the embarrassing parliamentary defeat. Presidential candidate Frank Hsieh becomes the party's acting chairman. The KMT victory sets the stage for a pivotal presidential contest in March. On election day, March 22nd, Kuomintang candidate Ma Ying-jeou claims victory, putting an end to 8 years of DPP rule. At a press conference that evening, Ma says he will only consider a peace deal with China if it dismantles missiles aimed at Taiwan. Taiwan's Vice President-elect, Vincent Hsu, holds a historic meeting with President Hu Jintao on the sidelines of the Boao Forum on April the 12th. It's the highest-level encounter between a mainland leader and an elected Taiwan official since the two sides split in 1949. Another landmark meeting promises to open a new page in cross-strait ties. Talks on May 28th between President Hu Jintao and Kuomintang Chairman Wu Po-sheng are the first between top leaders of the ruling parties on both sides of the strait. June 12th, and formal dialogue resumes in Beijing between Taiwan and the mainland following an almost 10-year stoppage. The two sides agreed to set up representative offices to ease exchanges and travel for people across the Taiwan Strait. They will also work together in oil exploration. The next day, the mainland and Taiwan sign landmark agreements to begin regular direct weekend charter flights and open up Taiwan to mainland tourists. Those flights begin on July the 4th for the first time in 6 decades. On November the 3rd, the most senior mainland envoy to visit Taiwan in half a century, Chen Yunlin, arrives in Taipei for a 5-day visit. The president of the Association for Relations Across the Taiwan Strait signs agreements on direct flights and cargo shipping, as well as cooperation in postal services and food safety. Daily cross-strait flights begin on December the 15th. And on November 21st, Taiwan and the mainland have held their highest-level meeting in an international setting since 1949. President Hu Jintao meets with Taiwan's former Premier Lian Chan at the APEC summit in Lima, Peru. Also in 2008, former President Chen Shui-bian comes under investigation again and quits the Democratic Progressive Party following reports his family's alleged involvement in money laundering. On November the 11th, he is arrested. Prosecutors claim to have found sufficient evidence against Chen for that and corruption and embezzlement. Chen charges he's the victim of the Kuomintang's attempt to improve relations with the mainland and goes on a hunger strike. Still on December the 12th, he is indicted.
We next go from political earthquakes to natural ones. China and the rest of Asia are hit by major natural disasters in 2008. We'll have more on that.
Pakistan's government blames Al-Qaeda. 2 more luxury hotels and a Jewish centre are targeted by Muslim extremists on November 26th in Mumbai. A 60-hour rampage through India's financial capital kills 170 people. It's the 7th and most deadly terrorist attack in India in 2008, horrifying Indians and the world at large. Indonesians react calmly to the death of a man who led them for 32 years. Former president and strongman Suharto dies at the age of 86 after suffering multiple organ failure. Suharto is both reviled and worshipped by Indonesians. Some credit him with developing the country into an Asian power. Others believe he was a brutal and corrupt dictator. Whatever the case, it's the end of an era for the world's largest Muslim country. Another leader with the same reputation doesn't die but is ailing. Cuba's Fidel Castro announces his retirement after almost half a century at the helm. He's replaced by his brother Raul. February 28th in Thailand, ousted Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra makes an emotional return from exile. Thaksin is taken to court to face corruption charges and freed on $250,000 bail. But in August the 11th, Thaksin announces in a handwritten statement faxed to different news outlets while at the Beijing Olympics that he's jumping bail and fleeing to London, claiming he could not receive a fair trial because his political enemies are interfering in the courts to finish him and his family off. His political enemies also go after his successor and ally, Samak Sundarve. After 100 days of protest led by the People's Alliance for Democracy, they shut down much of the country's utilities and transportation. Samak declares a state of emergency on September the 2nd and calls on Thais the next day to decide in a referendum if they want him to resign, as protesters demand. The people never decide, but the Constitutional Court does on September 9th, ruling that Samak's appearance on a TV cooking show while in office posed a conflict of interest under the law. The decision automatically removes him from office. But protesters aren't swayed to go home as the new Prime Minister is Thaksin's brother-in-law, Somchai Wongsuwat. They forced the closure of Thailand's two main airports, severing commercial links and leaving 300,000 passengers stranded. On December the 2nd, a court ruling dissolves three parties in the ruling coalition and bans Somchai from politics for 5 years. Protesters leave the airports, ending an 8-day blockade. Somchai's exit clears the way for opposition Democrat Party leader Abhisit Vejjajiva. On December the 15th, he wins a thin majority in a parliamentary vote with the help of defectors from the ruling camp to become Thailand's third prime minister in as many months. In Malaysia, a wake-up call for Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi. His ruling Barisan Nasional coalition fails to win a two-thirds majority in parliament for the first time since 1969. Things are just as bad at the state level. The ruling coalition loses power in the state assemblies in Penang, Selangor, Kedah and Perak. Analysts cite a strong voter backlash against rising crime and inflation, as well as discontent among Chinese and Indian minorities complaining about discrimination. The leader of the opposition, Anwar Ibrahim, tries to bring down the Malaysian government with parliamentary defections in the ruling coalition. But that attempt suffers a setback in June when he is hit by a sodomy accusation for the second time in 10 years. Anwar dismisses it as a political conspiracy. August the 26th, and Anwar comes close to toppling the ruling National Front by scoring a resounding parliamentary election victory that puts him in a position to challenge for Malaysia's premiership. And in Nepal, former communist rebels win more than double the number of parliamentary seats of their nearest rival. The party of the former insurgents, the Communist Party of Nepal, form the backbone of the new government and usher in sweeping changes to the impoverished Himalayan nation. Among the biggest, the abolition of Nepal's 239-year-old monarchy.
There are more political storms across the globe in 2008. The year sees a new nation born. Fortunately, violence is largely avoided. Fighting also ebbs in Iraq, but increases in Afghanistan. We'll have more on that when we come back. Bush makes his first trip to the Middle East, and he makes a bold statement while appearing at a news conference with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but it proves a bit premature.
US President George W. Bush says he firmly believes there will be a signed peace deal between Israel and the Palestinians. And Bush said he is confident that a Palestinian state will emerge.
There will be a signed peace treaty by the time I leave office.
But Israel's Prime Minister says not so fast.
There will be no peace unless terror is stopped.
In 2008, Iran defies 3 sets of UN sanctions demanding it cease its nuclear program. North Korea is more forthcoming as it blows up a cooling tower at its Yongbyon nuclear reactor, preventing it from producing any more weapons-grade plutonium. But disputes over a US terrorism blacklist and verification demands lead to on and off again North Korean disabling. 5 years ago, the US went to war in Iraq to eliminate a regime it said was producing weapons of mass destruction. In 2008, it's different weapons they have to contend with: suicide bombers and roadside bombs. Still, the US surge, the growing competence of Iraqi forces and reconciliation with Sunnis inflict serious damage on militants, insurgents and al-Qaeda. Iraqi and coalition casualties also plummet in Iraq in 2008, and Baghdad and the US sign a status of forces agreement requiring US troops to leave by 2011. But Afghanistan is a different story. In the summer of 2008, annual American casualties in Afghanistan surpassed those in Iraq. In fact, 2008 is the deadliest year for Americans there since 2002. South America and the Colombian government makes lots of headway in 2008 against the region's most powerful and longest insurgency. It's capped off on July 2nd by a dramatic operation which frees 15 hostages from the revolutionary armed forces of Colombia, including former presidential candidate Ingrid Betancourt, held for 6 years. Also in 2008, one of the world's most sought-after war crimes fugitives is arrested after being on the run for more than a decade. Former Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic is captured in Belgrade by Serbian security forces. He's accused of committing crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing during the war in the Balkans in the 1990s and is put on trial by the International Criminal Court in The Hague. A state of emergency is declared in East Timor after a double assassination attempt leaves the country's president, José Ramos Horta, critically injured. Prime Minister Janana Gusmao escapes unhurt. Additional Australian troops are sent to bolster security. The East Timor government was born out of a guerrilla movement which fought for independence against Indonesia. A similar armed group in Kosovo also became a political movement and attains its goal on February the 17th. On that day, Kosovo's parliament declares independence, a move recognized by the United States, several European countries and Australia. In Pristina, Kosovo's capital, they rejoice. But in Serbia's capital, Belgrade, they display anger, much of it directed at America, in the first major outburst of anti-Western sentiment there since Slobodan Milosevic was ousted in 2000. Serb protesters attack the US embassy. Massed ranks of police in riot gear face a barrage of flares and other missiles, but still push protesters away from the embassy. McDonald's restaurants were also vandalized. One person dies and 150 people are injured in the violence. Nearly 200 people are arrested and 90 shops are ransacked. August the 8th, and Georgia tries to avoid the same fate as Serbia, losing Kosovo by making a grab for the breakaway region of South Ossetia. Then Russia, a supporter of the separatists, intervenes, marking Moscow's first military action against a former Soviet republic since the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union. Over a week of fighting and bombing leaves at least 2,000 dead. The Russians take their time leaving, and on August the 26th, Moscow recognizes the breakaway regions as independent countries. China seeks to put aside a history of turbulent relations with neighbor Japan in early May. President Hu Jintao arrives in Tokyo for China's highest-level visit to Japan in 10 years. President Hu hails progress toward resolving a dispute over energy rights in the East China Sea. But the improvement in Sino-Japanese relations may not last. On September 1st, highly unpopular Japanese Prime Minister Yasuo Fukuda abruptly resigns. The Prime Minister, whose priority was warmer ties with Beijing, is replaced by Taro Aso, an ardent nationalist. A change in government in Taiwan also marks a major breakthrough in relations